So good morning, everyone, and welcome again. Thank you very much for joining us today for this virtual presentation. We have an excellent turnout this morning. I believe we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 people joining us for this event. So that is tremendous. The event Recession and the BC housing market. My name is Calvin Lindbergh. I am the managing broker at Angel Hasman and Associates here in West Vancouver, and I will be moderating this session here this morning. We have two fabulous speakers with us, Marty Pospisil and Cameron Ogmundson. Between both of them, obviously there's a wealth of information and experience and knowledge, and they're going to help us make sense of this housing market in these unprecedented times, which is going to be very helpful for us. So first of all, I would like to introduce our title sponsor. They are By Design Construction. They are a second generation real estate development and investment company. By Design has established itself as one of the top home builders in the Vancouver area. They focus on working with clients and partners to maximize returns while balancing risk tolerance and time to value. Their aim is to create the right match each and every time. So thank you, By Design Construction, for sponsoring this event. So let's begin with the formal presentation. We want to make sure, of course, there is an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but we do have a tight schedule, so we'll certainly get to as many questions as we can. Once the Q&A period has opened, you can type your questions in the Q&A option in the panel at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. Our first speaker is Brendan Ogmundson. He's the chief economist for the BC Real Estate Association. Brendan has been with BCREA for 10 years and specializes in housing market analysis and macroeconomic forecasting. Brendan authors several BCREA monthly and quarterly publications and is a member of the BC Ministry of Finance's Economic Forecast Council. He is also a contributor to the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Survey of Professional Forecasters. So let's all welcome Brendan.
Thanks, Calvin. Quickly share my slides. Everyone can see that, I'm assuming. So I'm going to be presenting what we're seeing, kind of what's going on immediately, the immediate impact of COVID-19 on the BC and the Canadian economy, and then share some research that we did about a month ago and have been updating about what we think is going to happen to the housing market, both at the provincial level and the Vancouver level going forward. So we'll start where everything starts these days, and that's with this tracking the sort of evolution, the progress of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been putting together this particular slide, I think, since like April, perhaps. And I can remember the early days, just where we didn't know if we were going to be able to bend or flatten the curve, and things were looking pretty dire. So it's great to see, after all of the kind of hard work that people in BC and in Canada have done, we're kind of right along with all of the kind of benchmark countries for which countries have really performed the best in flattening the pandemic curve. You can see BC right along with kind of Hong Kong, South Korea, really, again, those kind of benchmark countries. Even though we've done a great job, obviously still a ways to go. Things aren't back to normal yet, but certainly I think we can kind of start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. If we look at just Canadian comparisons by province, similar story. This is daily growth rates, kind of smoothed out, so averaged over 7 days. You can see, again, in most cases, daily growth rates are down kind of below, I think below 2%, below 1% in some cases. So again, a really good job of containing and the virus through all the mitigated measures that we've taken in BC and across Canada. And so, much better to be here where we are today versus where we were 3 months ago. So looking at the economic impact of COVID-19, this is a tool that we use to track the provincial economy in as close to real time as we can. It's called our nowcast. So, instead of a forecast, it's a nowcast because we're just trying to figure out what's happening right now in the economy, because it's not GDP data for provinces is only released annually and with a pretty long lag. So this list allows us to get a sense of how the economy is growing on a monthly basis. It's available on our website. You can subscribe and get it in your inbox every month if you so wish. I think it's gonna be pretty fascinating to follow going forward. You can see that in March, which is about about half of March was impacted by the pandemic and the kind of resulting shutdown of the economy. In March, we estimate that the economy contracted by about 3.1%, pretty close to kind of the worst months of the 2008-2009 recession. And then we have a flash estimate for April, where we expect that the economy contracted perhaps into double digits. You recall that was the month when Canada lost 1 million jobs or 2 million jobs, and really a lot of the economic data that's coming in for April is really reflecting almost sort of historically weak economy. This is going to be fascinating to track going forward. Not just it used to be kind of, well, how bad is it going to get? And we know it's going to get really bad in April, perhaps in May, but it's going to be even more interesting going forward because it'll really show turning points and really help guide us about where the economy is today. Are we into a recovery? How strong is that recovery? So again, a fascinating thing to watch going forward. One of the real kind of hallmarks of this pandemic is, of course, everybody staying at home. And one way to track that, not just, again, tracking how bad things are getting, but how we're recovering, is through restaurant reservations. So it's one of the most immediate pieces of data we have because it's updated on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis. And again, you can kind of track how the pandemic progressed. You can see in Vancouver, as of the second half of February, we're still seeing positive year-over-year growth in restaurant reservations. And then you can see the progress of the pandemic as restaurants eventually drop to being sort of 100% empty or having their reservations decline completely. Now, which is pretty interesting, we've added the data for the end of May. You can see things slowly getting back to, I wouldn't say normal, but kind of reopening in Vancouver. Restaurant reservations at the end of May were only down about 80% rather than 100%, so that we'll consider that progress. Same thing in places like Calgary. And then you compare even to New York and Toronto, who still haven't really opened up their restaurants yet. So not everybody is on the same schedule. And then it's kind of a measure of tourism. We include Las Vegas in there, and they're starting to open up as well. So some signs that things are progressing, still a long way to go. Another kind of immediate measure we can look at is the share of households, or the share of people that are moving around a city. So you see the benchmark from 11 weeks ago, I think it's about 12 weeks ago now. I haven't updated this data this week. You can see that about 80% of the city in Vancouver was moving around the city. And again, you track through the pandemic, and we got to kind of a bottom, kind of the floor on movement around the city seemed to be about 15%. But since then, last week and this week, we've started to see things slowly pick up. As the economy reopens, people are headed back to work and more comfortable traveling around with obviously some mitigating measures like masks and other things. But we're starting to see more movement. Again, you look at a benchmark kind of country like Seoul, who sort of maintained about a 40% kind of movement around the city, but they haven't really moved much off of that recently. So it'd be really interesting to track this going forward as well, because it's a really good idea of how comfortable people are getting kind of back into the world. Looking at jobless claims, so obviously a huge employment impact due to COVID-19. This is kind of indicative of every chart economists are going to be seeing going forward. A lot of what we're seeing in the data is unprecedented, and I think this one illustrates it best. When we look at CERB claims, so the sort of the emergency benefit for unemployed workers or temporarily unemployed workers, hit about 8.2. I think maybe it's up to 8.3 million claims, unique claims in May. We look back on history. That March claims number was 1 million, and it used to look really big. It obviously been dwarfed by what we've seen subsequently. The old record, which again used to look like a pretty big spike during the financial crisis at 330,000 claims, is now barely perceptible. So this is something we'll see in all of these charts going forward, is that the data we're seeing is so extreme that it makes previous extreme values are basically unobservable. So unemployment rates, both in Canada and BC, have spiked. Obviously, BC was around 5% before COVID. It's up to about 13.5% as of May. Canada is up around that same level. If we look a little bit under the hood at unemployment, it's a little bit, we see, there's sort of the workers that StatsCan considers unemployed, in that they've lost their job. And they're still looking, but they're not currently employed. There are other layers of unemployment. People have had their hours reduced. People who have been temporarily furloughed or temporarily unemployed, but expect to be hired back. And then discouraged workers who not only have lost their jobs, but have given up looking. So if we look at that level of unemployment in BC, it's more like 16%. The good news on that, and you can kind of see this in between the April and May numbers, in that temporarily unemployed number, those are the jobs that we can probably get back pretty quickly. And it's tens of thousands of jobs. You can see, in May, the economy actually surprisingly added 43,000 jobs, and a lot of it was from those temporarily unemployed. So in terms of turning things around and getting a lot of jobs back, that's probably the spot where we're going to get jobs back the fastest, in that temporarily unemployed section. Comparing what the labor market has looked like at the start of this recession compared to previous Canadian recessions, you can see that the speed and the magnitude of job losses is really unprecedented. So in just a couple months, unemployment fell, compared to where it was, about 15–20%. The hope sort of is that we can get some of those jobs back a little quicker. You can see, even though we did add 43,000 jobs in the province last month, that only gets us back a very small part of the way. So there's still a long way to go before we get back to normal. Hopefully, the shape of this recovery will look a little more like a V or perhaps kind of a check mark versus something like 1981, which was a really long recession that kind of lasted. We didn't actually get back to the previous peak of employment for about 5 years. So don't expect that this time around. We're hoping for a much faster recovery, but there still is a long way to go from where we are. So one of the really interesting things about this recession, the way it's impacting the job market, is the industries and the types of workers. So we'll go through that and kind of unpack all that over the next few slides. Usually in a recession, you see the jobs that are most impacted right away are kind of construction, manufacturing, sort of the goods sector of the economy. This time around, it's much more focused on the service sector. And so when we look at the most vulnerable BC industries, it's about 25% of employment. So things like retail, hotels and restaurants, movie theaters, sort of anything to do with crowds or crowds indoors especially, are the most susceptible. And again, that's about 25% of employment. And that's exactly where we've seen most of the job losses. So at one point, about 220,000 of the 390,000 or so jobs lost in the province were in those sectors specifically. And they're the ones that have come back. So a lot of the gains that we saw in May were also in those sectors. So starting to get some of those jobs back. Most of them you can think like your local coffee shop or restaurant, starting to reopen and starting to hire some of those people back. The other really interesting part of this recession is that the impact is really falling on younger workers. So we look at the increase in unemployment, the unemployment rate, say for what are typically minimum wage earning frontline service sector, 15 to 24, their unemployment rate has almost tripled. Even younger kind of to middle-aged workers, 25 to 44, have seen a pretty large spike and still rising as of May. But then older workers, 50 plus, are starting to see their unemployment rates kind of level out, if not come down. So the majority of the impact really falling on younger workers, and also falling on lower paying occupations as well. Again, a lot of frontline service sector, a lot of young workers, so no surprise that they're kind of lower paying. This has a lot of implications though for the housing market. And I think why we haven't seen, we've seen a big drop in sales, at least in April and May, because of basically people just shutting down and adhering to social distancing. But I think that the more sort of disruption is really in the rental market, where a lot of these lower paying jobs and frontline service sector jobs are more likely, especially in a place like Vancouver, to be supporting the rental market versus the ownership market. So I think there's probably a little bit more disruption there, at least in the immediate term, than in the ownership market. And just zeroing in again on Vancouver employment. So all the rest of the numbers were BC. For Vancouver, again, the majority of the job losses, I think as of April, it was about 110,000 jobs or 120,000 jobs lost. Most of those, again, in the sales and services sector. So what does this all mean for the BC economy as a whole? Well, we're forecasting that the economy will contract by a little over 6% in 2020. That will be the worst recession since 1982. Prior to COVID, we were expecting a pretty decent year, about 2.5% to 3% growth in 2020. There was a lot of reasons to be optimistic about growth in 2020. I think a lot of that will be shifted into 2021. So with all the pent-up demand we're seeing now, along with a lot of large infrastructure projects resuming, I think we'll see a pretty decent rebound in growth, maybe approaching 4% next year. Hopefully that means that we get some real traction on bringing the unemployment rate down. So unemployment rate never comes down very fast. So you can see this is just right from our model and has some uncertainty bounds around it. But generally, unemployment tends to take a little while to come down. You can see previously, the previous spike during the financial crisis, that took almost 10 years to get back to where we were before. I don't think it's going to take that long this time. I mean, this is a very unusual situation where we saw a lot of people lose their jobs temporarily. Hopefully we can get a lot of those jobs back and the unemployment rate will come down a little faster. We expect it to be hopefully down under 10% by kind of the middle of next year. And hopefully we can get that accelerated in the future. Obviously, this pandemic and recession is not just affecting BC, but all of Canada. And again, this is another chart where we're seeing pretty extraordinary and unprecedented data. So we look at the first quarter of 2020, and the Canadian economy contracted by close to 10%. It was like 8.2%. Remember whenever the media or when you hear an economist talking about GDP growth in Canada, they're always talking about it. It's a quarterly annualized number. So that's going to be really important in the next couple of months because we're going to get second quarter real GDP numbers, and we're expecting that number to be anywhere from -30 to -50%. It's a pretty wide range. We don't mean if you say that the quarterly number comes in at 50%, -50%, we don't mean that the economy lost half of its output. That's an annualized number. So essentially divide that by 4. What we mean is that the level of output in the economy fell by about 12.5%. So still a pretty staggering loss, but it's not 50%. So just keep that in mind. So what we're kind of modeling, what we're forecasting is about a 35 to 40% drop in the second quarter, and then about a 20% increase in the third quarter. So a really strong recovery. So you see in that chart to the right, That big drop down is the second quarter. The big spike up is the third quarter. That would be a record at 20%. But again, looking to the left, that doesn't get us even close to being back to where we were pre-COVID. So that black trend line on the left is sort of where kind of the trend pre-COVID. It's going to take a while to get back to that point, even with a 20% quarter, as all that demand kind of comes back at once, or a part of the demand comes back at once. It's going to take some time, and where our models sort of show, it's going to take till the end of 2022, if not a little bit longer, to get back to where we were pre-COVID. Hopefully, we get there faster, but right now, that's our expectation. So thankfully, just as there are measures to flatten the curve on the pandemic, there's also measures that the government can take to flatten the recession curve, and they're doing a lot of these things, or all of these things. So the number one thing, ensure workers can remain employed and collect paychecks. So when you think about programs like the wage subsidy or the kind of elevated EI benefit, $2,000 per person in a household does a lot to help bridge through this really difficult time. Ensure firms can survive through easier borrowing terms and financial assistance. So think about rent relief and easier borrowing terms from Bank of Canada actions, and then support the financial system to stave off financial crisis. So this is a really important one, and I'll kind of show you how close we were getting on kind of credit measures to approaching what we were seeing in 2008, 2009. So a lot of the actions taken by the Bank of Canada really helped to kind of stave off a real spike in risk premiums and a real spike in borrowing really across Canada. So all these measures, the federal government has kind of followed this playbook almost to a T. And I think we're seeing, at least in the job numbers in May, we unexpectedly saw the economy added jobs a little earlier than expected. So I think we're seeing that it's working. Spending is coming back. Consumer spending is coming back as well, because even if people have lost their jobs, they're still able to make their monthly obligations and have something left over. So maybe some might argue that those benefits were too generous, but I think in a time of crisis, that's what we need. And really kind of comparing the size of the fiscal response. So in a normal recession, like the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, we saw the government pump in about 3% of GDP over 2 years to try and stimulate the economy. What we're seeing now is closer to 10% of Canadian GDP and a lot faster. And so this is why when economists generally, when we talk about the response to COVID, it's a lot more like the response to a natural disaster than it is to a regular recession. You can think of this as the economy's been hit by some kind of cataclysmic event, or the country's been hit by this cataclysmic event that is preventing people from going to work and opening up their shops, and we're just helping. So we need to respond by bridging people through the crisis period, and that's exactly what we're doing. So the scale of what you're seeing is much more akin to kind of disaster relief, and then we can kind of, once the crisis part is over, we can kind of think about paying for it, which I'm sure there'll be questions about. So the Bank of Canada is also doing its part, not just in lowering its overnight rate to what it considers its effective lower bound of 0.25%. So the bank is kind of on the record as stating that they do not favor using negative interest rates, as some countries, mostly in Europe, have experimented with. They consider 0.25% to be as low as they're going to go, but they're also doing a ton of things with their balance sheet. So really, if you look across the entire spectrum of Canadian credit markets, the Bank of Canada is doing something to get those borrowing costs down. You can see here, so I was talking about before, when we look at credit markets and credit spreads, looking at U.S. high yield corporate spreads is kind of a proxy because there's not great data for Canada on high yield corporate borrowing costs. But the Fed in the United States is doing a lot of the same things as the Bank of Canada here, and you can see it's really working. The beginning of the crisis, you can see that credit spreads for riskier companies were really starting to spike, and perhaps we were going to approach where they were in 2008, 2009, before all of the extra facilities and all the liquidity being pumped into those markets by the Fed helped bring those costs down. Same thing's happening in Canada with purchases of corporate bonds and I think even corporate bond ETFs. Look at the Canadian mortgage market. Bank of Canada also was buying Canadian mortgage bonds to really inject liquidity into that market. You can see the spreads there were a little bit higher still for a while, mostly because the sort of the denominator in that relationship, the 5-year bond yield that we're comparing mortgage rates to, hit basically a record low, and it took a long time for kind of mortgage rates to come down after that. And then on short-term borrowing costs, you can see there's a real spike at the beginning of this before, once again, all of those purchases and things like bankers' acceptances and commercial paper started to add a ton of liquidity to those markets. And now borrowing costs are actually spreads are even lower than they were pre-COVID. You can see the effect all of those facilities have had on mortgage rates. So we look at, prime rate is obviously as low as it's going to go at 2.45%. You can see most variable rate mortgages now are around, prime minus 20 for the most part. Maybe you can get a bit better. 5-year fixed rates had been actually approaching 3% during the crisis until we got all that liquidity injected into the system, and have since fallen to about 2.49. That's probably about as low as they're going to go, given where 5-year government bond yields are at. And then the problem here is the qualifying rate. So that gray line is the 5-year posted rate, and it's the qualifying rate used on both the insured and uninsured stress test. It has come down slightly. It was for a while still hovering in the 5s, now down to 4.94. That's the rate, of course, that you need to qualify at for a mortgage. It's also the rate that banks use to charge interest rate penalties, so they like to keep it high. One of the reasons why there was going to be a change to the stress test rules, at least for sure for insured mortgages and likely for B20, where the new stress test as of April 6th was going to be the average 5-year fixed rate plus 200 basis points. So right now, if they'd gone ahead with that change, you should be able to qualify at 4.49%, which would be a real help. Instead, we're at 4.94% still because they shelved that change indefinitely at the beginning of the crisis. I'd argue that now is a great time to reinstitute that change. The CMHC obviously has other ideas, since they are actually turning to tightening credit in the midst of a deep recession, which is a bewildering choice for economists. But clearly the CMHC right now is not interested in helping the recovery of the housing market. One thing that is helping is mortgage deferrals. So about 12% of Canadian mortgages so far have used the 6-month deferral program offered by banks. The largest share of deferrals is in Quebec and Alberta and Ontario. In BC, just 7% of total deferrals. I think BC is about now 18% of mortgages, only 7% of deferrals. So seemingly not as big of a problem in BC, not as many people in BC taking advantage of that program. But those deferrals are really helping to prevent defaults. This is some really interesting work done by the Bank of Canada recently, where they simulated what mortgage arrears would be or what defaults would be with and without deferrals. And you can see they estimate that with that the deferral program is really helping to stave off those mortgage arrears. So without them, we would probably be seeing record levels of mortgage arrears by the end of the year. And instead, we expect to see very little change, except maybe into 2021, as some of the supports from the government end. Okay, so I think pretty convincing we're in a recession. I think all of the data certainly points there, and even the NBER came out yesterday and said the U.S. recession started in February. I believe the CD Howe Institute said the same for Canada before that. So what happens to the housing market in recession? So we did a bunch of research a little while ago, just kind of looking at if there are some similar patterns in how recessions impact the market and how we recover. So looking at home sales, pretty similar pattern for BC and obviously for Vancouver. We see a large drop at the beginning of a recession and then a very strong recovery in the second year following the recession. That pattern kind of holds through small sample, obviously, fortunately only three recessions in the past 40 years, but I think it's still an interesting guide. We see this very similar pattern each time. These are recessions that have different depths, different durations, different causes, and yet we see a very similar pattern in the housing market each time. Kind of zero in on prices, looking at monthly, there's a little more volatility. So on average prices tend to again decline in the middle of a recession and then start to recover towards the end. You can see if we look at annual, kind of average out all that volatility throughout the year, again, we see usually the response from pent-up demand and from usually, especially lower interest rates, means that often home prices actually finish the year higher, if not in the year of a recession, the year following. So you can see even in the financial crisis where we saw a pretty big decline on a monthly basis, Vancouver and BC actually finished the year a little bit higher in 2009, and then again 2010 had very strong price growth. So looking at the past and then doing our own kind of modeling work, kind of put together what we expect how we expect the COVID-19 associated recession to impact markets. So this was from, I believe we released this in April, so before we had any data, of course. So we expected a big drop in April and May, and then a kind of a slow recovery through the summer. So compared to baseline, so our pre-COVID baseline, about average level of sales, 7,000 to 8,000 a month for the province. We expected a big drop and then a recovery back to baseline kind of by the early part of next year. And that's kind of more or less in accord with what tends to happen in a recession. If we just apply, to today, the patterns of historical recessions, we see a very similar shape where we get an initial weakness, a big drop in sales, and then things come back. And in most cases, in all cases in previous recessions, we've actually seen home sales recover well beyond their sort of pre-recession baseline, actually post extraordinarily strong growth. So looking at where we are, so that was our projection. That orange line was our pre-COVID, or our projection in April at the kind of start of this. Looking at where we are today, things were a little bit worse. So sales across the province dropped a little more than we expected in April. Had a nice bounce back in May, and are tracking a little above our projection for June. So looks like we're having about the shape of recovery that we would expect. So a big drop, and then things are recovering maybe a little faster than we expected. Doing the same kind of exercise for Vancouver. So this is just for REBGV. Again, we have to model it a little bit differently, but the same kind of idea. Big drop in April, and then an assumption that we kind of get back to that pre-COVID baseline by around the early part of 2021. And we're kind of seeing this recovery happen right now. We can track sales per day, and in April, you can kind of see that middle part of April, the second, third week of April, is where things really bottomed out around 50 a day. Normally this time of year, we would be closer to 100, 150 per business day. Post May long weekend, there was a real shift. So we were kind of trawling at that 50 a day kind of level. And in the second, third week of May, third, fourth week of May, we started to see a real shift from about 50 per day to about 90 per day. And I think in the past week, we've had several days where we've actually had more than 100 sales per day. So things are clearly picking up across Vancouver since the long weekend. So looking at that pace and applying what we've actually seen to our projections, May was pretty close to exactly where we thought we would be, but June is on a much better pace than our model would suggest. Again, a lot can change going forward, but so far, at least, we're seeing a bit of a faster return to normal activity for the Vancouver market. So crucially, that's on the demand side. Crucially, what happens to prices really depends on what happens to the supply side of the market, and specifically to the total number of resale listings. So again, when we model these things, usually when you get a big negative shock to GDP and a large increase in the unemployment rate, you would expect to see listings start to really pile up. So they're getting a lot of motivated selling from people who've lost their jobs, other reasons. That's what we saw during the 2008, 2009 recession. See that light blue line kind of follows what we'd expect. The orange unbroken line is what the model wants to happen because it's just responding to higher unemployment rates. What we did though is think, well, this is a very different recession than we would normally see, especially because we have this added kind of wrinkle of social distancing, and people don't necessarily want to list their homes. They don't necessarily want people coming into their homes, touching their stuff. And so what we modeled this instead as an alternative scenario, that listings would actually decline for the first couple months of the recession and then start to accumulate, but hit a much lower peak than they would otherwise. So we ran that scenario as well, and we're actually tracking listings on a seasonally adjusted basis even lower than what we expected in that scenario. So it seems like that's what's playing out. Again, in Vancouver, we look at listings. April seemed to be the bottom, and now we're just in the kind of first week of June starting to get back to a normal seasonal level of listings. So the listing side seems to have completely normalized. On the active listing side, even though we've seen, there's a big drop in the beginning of April, another drop around the start of May, and since then, listings are starting to rise, but they were like 16,000 this time last year. So even though we're seeing an increase in listings, we're coming from a very low level and still way below where we were last year. Okay, so what does that mean for home prices? Again, a very similar shape when we look at past recessions and recoveries. We get that kind of a check mark kind of shape where there's a decline in home prices and the average price. This time it's a little bit more skewed because the average price for BC in March was really high, because of the way averages are calculated. Vancouver was a higher share than normal in March, and so the average price was skewed upwards. So we're starting from kind of a high point, which doesn't technically matter, but when we talk about kind of peak to trough declines and that sort of, we're starting from a very high level in March. But either way, we expect a kind of decline, and then things getting back to baseline kind of within a year. That's generally what we see in past recessions as well. The one real outlier being that thick blue line from 81, 82, where in 1981, home prices in the province had risen 41%. I think in Vancouver it was 80%. And so we had prices kind of crashing off that spike. And also mortgage rates had increased from 13% to 22%. So you can see the effect that has on prices. So that's the one outlier. There's an obvious cause for why that happened. We don't expect interest rates to hit 20% anytime soon. So I think much more likely we'll see the type of recovery from past recessions or in, again, our COVID-19 alternative. So you can see here, comparing the actuals to our projections, tracking along that alternative scenario where we get a much lower increase in supply. So right now for the province, we are tracking pretty much bang on what we thought we would be at this time. We'll see how that progresses, but prices have been very, very firm across the province throughout this crisis. And then looking at the REBGV HPI benchmark, data only goes back to 2005, so only one recession to compare it to, and that's the financial crisis. So it's an interesting comparison because that recession started actually in February of 2008. but things didn't really ramp up. The financial crisis part of it didn't really ramp up until about October. So you can see there was a very late kind of a hit to home prices in that recession, and then things recovered. And I think in that recession, prices I think fell 6% in 2009 for the HPI benchmark price, but then we're up like 10% in 2010. So a very strong recovery. This time around, we're kind of expecting things to be more or less flat, maybe a little below what we would have said was our baseline. We're a little bit more bullish on prices for this year, pre-COVID. I think we'll still end up with prices basically, flat to slightly up over the next year. So just to kind of summarize, every recession we've seen, the following year has seen a very strong recovery in sales. So we look at, the recession started in 81. By 82, home sales in BC were up 30%. Home sales in Vancouver were up nearly double. In 91, home sales were up 46% the year after the recession started, 61% in Vancouver, and even in the financial crisis by 2009, home sales were up 44% in 2009. So, these are all recessions that had different causes, different durations, different depths, but very similar, very strong recoveries, and there's no reason to expect why this time would be any different. So we're gonna take questions at the end. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing what Marty has to say. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute there. I thought the powers that be at the Vancouver board were going to unmute me, but anyway, I did it myself. I'm very technical. So thank you so much, Brendan. That was incredibly informative. We went on a bit of a roller coaster there. It was sobering and encouraging and somewhat optimistic information, but certainly it helps us see where hopefully we're going to be going in the very near future. So next up, I'd like to introduce Marty Pospisil. He is the director and managing broker of Pospisil Realty Group. Marty was born and raised in Vancouver. He attended UBC and studied civil engineering. Following graduation, he followed in his father's footsteps and worked for the city of Vancouver for a number of years as a professional engineer in the engineering department. Though he loved the technical systems and creative aspects of the job, there was something missing. So in 1992, he made the change to real estate and has been helping clients buy and sell homes ever since. Real estate has given Marty the ability to apply his engineering background to develop systems for building up a database of clients, selling property, and smoothly assisting clients through the process. In 2017, Marty, along with his nephew Adam, founded Pospisil Realty Group, a boutique real estate brokerage located in Vancouver's west side. So let's all welcome Marty.
Thanks, Calvin, and thanks, Brendan. What a great presentation. Really appreciated that. Some great numbers that you guys are providing us. I'm just going to share my screen here and get started on my presentation. Very good. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I hope I'm able to provide many of you with something worthwhile to take away at the end of my presentation. I've been asked to discuss overcoming down markets using a sophisticated analytical statistical approach. Well, with my background, I'm a very analytical person, for those of you that know me, and as a result, we're very systems oriented here at Pospisil Realty. So I'm thrilled to have thrown some information together here for us today. Of course, following my presentation, I'm happy to answer any questions you have and to provide my slideshow to any that would like a copy, and feel free to take screenshots as I'm going through my presentation. I have over 45 minutes worth of material put together, and I've only got 30 minutes, so I'm gonna dive right into it here and jump into my presentation. So first of all, I'm going to talk about recovery from a traditional point of view. And what I mean by that is, regardless of what we're recovering from, whether it be a recession or just a quieter market, there's certain things that I've always done in the past to recover and build my business. And that's what I'm going to start my discussion on. And then I'm going to touch on a few things we're doing a little bit differently post-COVID. So from a traditional point of view, the way I like to train our licensees is to begin with setting a goal. You can't really get anywhere without having a destination. And your goal can be numerical, number of transactions. It could be a financial goal that you want to achieve within a certain period of time. But you've got to have that goal in order to get to the next level. And your second step, once you have the goal, is determine the steps that you require to achieve your goal. Now, obvious steps that you want to go through to achieve your goal are to do prospecting. You want to educate yourself, bring yourself up to date with what's working, what isn't. And you want to track your results and see what's giving you the biggest payback for the steps that you're actually following through. So it's a constant dynamic process where you're monitoring what's working and what isn't. But you have to determine what steps you have to go through to achieve your goal. Now, for me, I believe that one of the best ways to prospect is to get face-to-face with clients. Now, whether that means on the phone, at the door, face-to-face interaction, getting information to them, touching base, having them meet you is, I think, the most cost-effective way to prospect. It's free. You don't need to spend lots of money sending out flyers, postcards, etc. Get back to the basics. And I'm a big believer in calling and door knocking. So I find those some of the basic prospecting steps to carry out. Now, number 3, you want to schedule those steps into a weekly routine. So you've got your goal, you set out how you're going to achieve that goal, and then you want to work it out into how many calls, how many doors you should be knocking every week to make a certain number of contacts or leads and then convert those into appointments. So scheduling your weeks, I think, is a very important step because it's very easy to get busy and not do your prospecting. If you've got it in your schedule and it's an appointment, it's more likely to happen. So number 4, I think, is a big one. Number 5, when you actually get your appointments and you're presenting to your sellers and your buyers, you should really have a highly effective presentation. So you want to have a very good listing presentation. And we've also developed a very good buyer's presentation for when we're meeting with buyers in our buyers meetings. So both are very important. Number 5, you want to work on those. You want to have a presentation that's going to be effective in order to convert those appointments into actual listings and active buyers. Number 6, you actually want to carry out what you said you're going to do in your presentation. So you want to have a very good marketing plan, and you want to have effective buyer systems that are going to help your buyers have the best home shopping experience possible, get the best value. You want to get the best sales prices, of course, for your clients. So your marketing plan, extremely important. And number 7, obviously, you want to get results. You want to deliver on what you promised back in number 5, and you want to get results from your clients. Now, most people don't go to the next step, and I think the next step is probably one of the most important ones. You want to keep them as clients. You've worked so hard to find these people, recruit them as clients, sell their property or sell them into a property. You got to have a very good client retention program. Okay, so again, the first step is, what is your goal? How much are you wanting to make? And when do you want to make that by? Is it going to be typically in the next year? Is it a shorter goal? You set the length of time that you want to make that particular goal happen. And how are you going to achieve your goal? So that was step number 1, feeding into the next step. Now, fasten your seatbelts. Here is the analytical part of the presentation. Some of you are going to love this. some of you, your eyes are going to glaze over. So bear with me. I'm going to go through it step by step. How do you calculate the number of calls and doors you need to knock every week in order to meet your goal? So let's do it. Let's do an example. For example, say you want to make a nice lofty goal of $300,000. You want to be making more money than the heart surgeon who lives next door to you, and you want to make that in the next 12 months. Okay, what do we need to do to achieve that? I'm going to go through a couple of assumptions that I make when I'm goal setting and when I'm goal setting with my licensees. And one of the first ones is, for every listing that I sell, I will recruit 2 buyers and I will sell one of those buyers into a home. Okay? So I've got a very good buyer follow-up program, and I have a 50% success rate in recruiting buyers. So for every listing that I'm going to sell, I'll have an equal buyer sale, list to last. You get double the results from listings than you might get working with buyers. Doesn't mean that buyers agents are not making as much of an income, but I just find it more productive to focus on the listings and develop buyer transactions out of the listings themselves. So those are my assumptions. So whatever my goal is, I'm going to assume, based on my past experience, that half of that income is going to come from working with buyers. Okay. Let's talk about performance factors. Now, performance factors are going to be different for every single one of you out there. Some of you are going to be excellent prospectors and you're going to get lots of leads. Others are going to be very good at converting those leads into appointments, listing the property, selling the property. You're all going to have different performance factors, and you're going to be able to calculate these based on your experience over the past year. If you're new to the business, ask your managing broker to help you estimate what your factors might be as a new licensee. Number one, the first thing I like to calculate is, what is the average commission that I'm making per transaction? Pretty easy to do. You take the total commission you've made in the last year, you divide it by the number of transactions you carried out, and there's your commission per transaction. Ours happens to be around $10,000 per transaction. We sell everything from condos up to very high-end homes. Some of you might specialize just in high-end homes, and your commission per transaction might be $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000, but you're doing less transactions. So everybody's number here is going to be different. The second performance factor, what is your listing to buyer deals ratio? In other words, how many listings are you selling every year, and how many buyer deals are you doing every year? For us, pretty well year after year after year, we're doing 50-50. We're doing half listings, half buyers. Makes our calculation very easy here, and it's a good balance. Now, the next performance factor that is going to be different for everyone is your calls to leads ratio. So in other words, how many people do you need to call in order to get a lead? For me, it's 100 people. So I need to go through and make 100 calls before I'm going to get a lead that I can work with for either listing prospect or a buyer. 100 calls per lead. Doors happen to be a little bit more effective. It might be the fact that you're there in person, but I found you only need to door knock 50 doors before I get a listing prospect. So that's interesting. Takes maybe a little bit more time. You're walking from door to door, but nothing beats door knocking on a great sunny day in Vancouver. So it's nice to mix up the two, the calling and the door knocking. But my doors to leads ratio is 50. So that's kind of interesting. Now, this is an important one. What is your lead to listing appointment conversion rate? So in other words, how many of your leads are you actually converting into appointments? For us, let's say it's 50%. So for every 2 leads that I am getting, I know one of them is going to turn into a listing appointment. Okay, it's good to know. Now, once I get that listing appointment, what is my listing appointment to listings success ratio? So in other words, for all the appointments that I'm going to, how many of them am I converting into listings? Let's say I'm relatively new to the business, I don't have the best listing presentation, and I'm at 50%. So for every 2 appointments I'm going into, I'm going to list up one of the properties. So for the sake of this calculation, let's use 50%. Some of you more experienced realtors are going to be upwards 70, 80, or 90+% if you've got a really great listing presentation. So again, your personal performance factors are going to determine how much prospecting you need to do to achieve your goal. And every one of these that you tweak and improve is going to increase your earnings and make you more effective. So your listings to listing success ratio is a very important one. And the last one, how many of my listings am I selling? What is my listings to sales ratio? So let's say I'm selling half of all the listings I'm taking, getting half of them expiring, at half of them I'm selling. So my listings to sales ratio is 50%. So let's use these performance factors to calculate how many doors or how many calls I need to make every week to achieve my $300,000 goal. Okay, so from the calculation, from this I can assume that if I want to make $300,000, I need to ensure half of it, $150,000 of it, is generated through listing presentations and selling listings. Remember, for every listing I'm getting, I'm recruiting 2 buyers and I'm going to sell one of them into a property. So I cut my goal in half and I focus on the listings. If my listings commission per transaction is $10,000, I divide the 150 by 10,000. I need to do 15 listing transactions every year to make 300,000. That sounds pretty easy, but we've got to work in the other performance factors. So I need to sell 15 listings in 12 months. That's 1.25 listings or listing transactions per month. But remember, I only sell 50% of my listings. So I really need 2.5 listings per month. Fair enough? So if I get 2.5 listings per month, I can achieve my goal. But again, remember, if I convert 50% of my listing appointments into actual listings, I really need to be going into 5 listing appointments per month. Okay? One more adjustment we need to make is our lead conversion rate. It's not 5 leads you need per month. Remember, you're only converting 50% of your leads into listing appointments, so you've got to double it again based on my personal performance factors. So if I need 5 listings appointments per month and I convert every second lead into a listing, I need to actually get 10 leads per month. That's my magic number. So if I need 10 leads per month in order to get 5 listings, you can convert how many calls and doors you need to make per week very easily. I need to, if I'm getting a 1 lead per 100 calls, that's 100 times 10. I need to call 1,000 people per month or 250 people per week. Pretty doable. Or I can door knock 50 times 10, 500 a month, or 125 doors per week. Very manageable. Take those prospecting calls per week and work them into your schedule. If you do it every week, you're going to hit your goal. It's a fact. So that's kind of interesting. Now I take that information, my prospecting calculation for how many doors or calls I need to make, and I work them into a weekly schedule. So what you can do is you can say, okay, I need to call 250 people a week. I'm going to do 2 sessions that I call 125 people in. It takes me so many minutes to make a call. I'm going to book 2 2-hour call prospecting appointments into my schedule at these times, and they're there. And hey, if I get a sunny day during the week and I just want to get out there and knock on some doors, I'm going to go out there and do a door knocking session, and depending how many doors I do, I can reduce the number of calls I'm making. So you can play around with those numbers, but you've got to hit those every week to make your goal. So now you've got the steps that you need to follow, and I've created this little analytical approach graph the graphic that shows the different steps to go through that I outlined a couple of slides earlier. Now down in the left-hand corner, you can see the weekly schedule. So for every one of our licensees, I recommend that we set up a weekly schedule, and you've got your prospecting blocks already in there, and you do not change those. The only time you change them is if you have a listing appointment, they can only meet during that time. You've got to slide that appointment to another slot. So put it in your weekly schedule down here, very effective. So your schedule prospecting, you've already calculated. Your lead conversion, when you're at the doors and you're on the phone, you want to practice your scripting, and there's various professionals that are out there that are excellent lead conversion coaches. Richard Robbins, Floyd Wickman, Bill Nasby was my guru that I went to for many years for door knocking scripting, and there's many, many more that are out there. Practice your scripting, because there's sometimes more effective scripting you can use on the phone and at the door to convert those people that you're meeting with into actual leads. Once you get your leads, here's the next performance factor we talked about, is how effective is your listing kit and how effective is your buyer's kit. Spend time on this, you guys, because this is what's going to instill the confidence in the client that you're meeting with to hire you. So go through it with your managing broker, pick a top producing agent in your office and get some pointers, and they're more likely going to be willing to help you to improve your presentation to both your sellers and your buyers. So you're very effective in this step, very important. And then carry out what you promised. You know, you're going to be doing your marketing. Your marketing plan should be very comprehensive and effective, whether you're using MLS, print publications, social media, open houses. Of course, we're not doing now, but this is the traditional approach. All of that marketing takes place in order to get your results, and you sell the property or you sell your buyer into a property. Now, that last step we have a lot of fun with here at Possible Show Realty, the client retention program. We've got, I think, 1,500 past clients right now who live in our market area. So we do annual pumpkin patches, fundraisers for the Cancer Foundation. We do Star Wars movie mornings where we dress up as characters in Star Wars and invite all our clients to the theater. We have a blast doing that. We form a team for the Ride to Conquer Cancer every year. We do Canada Day celebrations. We get in touch with our clients throughout the year in events. We also touch base with them personally a couple of times a year by phone. But client retention, you guys, is very important. 80% of our business in our brokerage is repeat and referred. So we're focusing 80% of our budget and time into client retention. So it's something you want to focus on. Don't do the deal and forget about them. Many of the properties we list and the presentations we go into, they had a previous realtor, and the realtor that they had never kept in touch with them, and they forgot who they were, how to get a hold of them. So client retention is very important. So that's the traditional analytical approach. Works great. It's very systematic for somebody who's analytical like me. But even if you're not, if you're able to do that calculation and bring it down to what you have to do and you follow through with the program, you'll get guaranteed results. But what's different here? We're recovering from a pandemic, not just a recession. The buyers and the sellers out there, they're confused. They're uneasy. And they're certainly more anxious than they were a few months ago. So what do we have to do that's different to enhance that traditional approach post-COVID-19? Well, I think the very first step that you need to do is call and check up on your clients. Just see how they're doing. Touch base with them. Get in touch with them. The second thing is, your clients and the public are starving for information on real estate. What is happening in the market? Are things selling? What are prices doing? Where are they going? Tell us. They are starving for information. So there's various things that you can do to get that information out to your clients and the public: newsletters, market update meetings. We'll talk about videos, You want to educate them in every appointment that you have with them. So education is very important. And there's a couple of things that we're doing a little differently to enhance our traditional marketing program post-COVID-19, that some of them we were doing before, but we're doing them better now, and some of them we weren't doing at all. So I'll share those ideas with you as well. So let's talk about those three areas that are an enhancement to the traditional approach: calling, educating, and marketing. So let's talk about calling first. You want to call your clients, but remember, your clients are facing many stresses today. Many of them have lost their jobs. Some have health issues. Some of them have family issues post-COVID. There's certainly financial uncertainty for many of them. And many of them are suffering from what the common phrase is, pandemic fatigue. I built a home gym in our cabana over COVID, and I've got the radio going on in there every time my wife and I are working out. And yesterday morning on the radio, they were talking about people who are building mini cafe tables, bistro tables, and tiki houses, and mounting them on city boulevard trees where they would stake an apple into the table so the squirrels could come and eat. Great idea. Good example of pandemic fatigue. You wouldn't see that in normal situations. I find that quite interesting. There's high anxiety out there. So speak softly when you call your clients, be empathetic, and be gentle. Richard Robbins has a great script. Hi, Mrs. Robinson. I hope you're healthy and doing well. The market's starting to open up again. Are you still interested in buying or selling a home? If so, let me know, and I'd love to answer any questions you may have. It's a great script. Okay, so you've made your call, you've touched base with your clients. Now you want to bring in that education component. What's the best way to do that? Well, we have incredible market resources available to us. We are very lucky here in BC. The Real Estate Board Stats Division, they put out amazing stats throughout the month. You can access it through Paragon. We do bring it up all the time in presentations when we're getting specific. The BCREA, Brendan and Kelly at BCREA and the rest of their team do an absolutely amazing job keeping us informed of what's happening, and very importantly, what can happen with their forecasting. Fantastic tools. Great job at BCREA. Snap Stats is another great source of information. Real Estate Weekly's been putting out some great stuff on their surveys. And of course, CMHC intentionally put down there at the bottom with their last announcement. So Real Estate Weekly, here's a really interesting graph we use in our presentations. A lot of people say, well, aren't a lot of the buyers just not buying? Well, they surveyed people through their website, and they found quite extensively that pre-COVID, there were 52% of the buyers going to buy a home in 2020. And during the pandemic, that only dropped to 44%. So an 8% drop. It's not like people are thinking, it's an 80% drop. It's a marginal drop, and likely those are those temporary baristas, restaurant servers, etc., that have lost their jobs immediately in the shutdown and are waiting to come back. So a marginal impact on the number of buyers. Again, stats that the boards put out are extremely useful using the sales to active ratio. We refer to that all the time. Where is our market currently? We like Snap Stats. Snap Stats gives us the ability to find out what the absorption rate or the sales ratio is for your specific product in your specific neighborhood and even in your price band. Really, really good information to be telling a seller or a buyer in your meeting with them. So Snap Stats, another great source. Well, you've seen these graphs already with Brendan. Sorry to repeat them. Brendan, great information. Who doesn't want to know how the economy is being impacted by COVID-19? and where are the unemployment rates going? The listings activity projections. These are all great pieces of information that Brendan and his team have put out. What are the unit sale projections? This is probably the most important one that we've been sharing with clients is, what are prices going to be doing? And are they going to be hitting bottom? And when is that going to be? And wow, look at how long this recovery rate is. So if you're sitting down with the seller and they're trying to decide when to list, this is fantastic information, because it's pretty clearly you list right now or you wait if you want to get the best pricing. And for buyers, wow, there's going to be an amazing window opening up this summer where buyers should really be taking advantage of. So let's start getting that information to you guys. So really good information coming out by our service providers. Here's one that CMHC put out in their housing forecast report, showing sort of a band of forecasting for the average pricing into 2021, 2022. You notice it's a little bit more delayed compared to the BCREA forecasting, but nonetheless, very good information. And then what we've done is we've taken all this information and we've done some market update videos where I sit down and one of our team members videotapes me going through these slides and just explaining them and how are they affecting our market. And people actually watch it. It's like, I did one for 10 minutes long and I was surprised at how many people watched it. But there you go. It just shows that people are wanting that information. So you've done your calls, you've educated your clients, and you've educated the public maybe at the same time. Now, what are we doing a little differently to enhance our traditional marketing plan? Okay. One of the first things that we're doing are virtual tours. And virtual tours we've always done, but we've kind of enhanced them a little bit. I'll play you a very short montage of a recent one that we sold on West 8th Avenue. And you can see these on our website, but you can see we're actually flying up above our listings now, giving a nice 360-degree view of the neighborhood, what follows, what's surrounding it, what services, what restaurants, what are the major markers in the neighborhood. So we've enhanced our virtual tour to provide an online shopping experience for the client and the buyers that doesn't require them to come into the property unless, of course, they're at the point where they're interested enough to do so. So the virtual video tour, exterior and interior, has become a much more important part of our marketing campaign on a property-by-property basis. So that's kind of interesting to note. Another thing that we're doing right now is live stream broadcasting. Well, let me tell you, before COVID, my extent of knowledge on Facebook was posting vacation photos. That was it. So when our team got together in some strategy sessions when COVID hit and we talked about live stream broadcasts, this was all new ground for me and certainly for the rest of the team. But we've had a lot of fun doing it. And if you want to experiment with it, definitely give it a shot, because you're not holding open houses now. What better way to interact with your clients as you're going through the property than doing a live stream broadcast? I put together a short montage of one of, it's the same property actually. I'm Marty Foster-Gill, and we are live on Facebook today to introduce our new listing in the Cumberland. We're going live in 30 seconds, so we'll let everybody get a chance to log in, and we're going to do a nice little tour today of our new listing. As you can see, in behind me here is the Cumberland building. We are at 37. I think this was the second one or third one that I've done. Let's go inside and have a look at this beautiful home. We try and make them fun as well. I think people enjoy a little bit of humor as they're watching a live stream. Good sized foyer, good ceiling heighting here, lots of natural light already in the unit. And let's just pop right into the living area here and have a look at the size of this living area. Right there off of the bed, we've got another fireplace, which is really cool. So you can actually lie in bed here and look out the window on the mountains and enjoy the view. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So say you're lying in bed. Now I forgot this is a blow-up bed, so I could have actually punctured it and fallen to the floor, but I didn't. Look at the beautiful mountain view. And have the fireplace on. That's pretty awesome. Ow. Hello, So that was Mark. just something that we did in the past, and in the past few listings that we launched over COVID. And you know, it's really interesting because pre-COVID in a traditional open house, we would probably be pretty impressed if we got 100 people out at the open house. I think you'd all agree with me, 150 would be pretty well a record. That particular video on West 8th had 2,500 full through plays. So 2,500 people actually watched that entire 18-minute video, which completely blows me away because you'd never get that kind of exposure in a traditional open house. So just something to bear in mind. This is something new we're doing. We're experimenting with it. As we're doing the live streams, you can interact with your clients on Messenger. They can ask questions as you're walking through, have a teammate or another licensee in your brokerage help you so they can log in and answer the questions. It's actually a lot of fun, and we do get some very, very good feedback from that. So live stream broadcasting is new. And of course, if you're entertaining showings and your sellers are happy with doing that, you want to do that in a private showing that's COVID safe. We developed a COVID safe showings protocol that we follow quite strictly with masks and gloves and 6-foot spacing and only one family at a time. We open all the doors, air the home out. It's done very, very carefully. So the buyers can have a comfortable walkthrough of the home, and the sellers are comfortable that their home is safe to come home to at the end of the showing period. Now, another thing you might want to consider doing is, instead of just emailing offers to your clients, is do a dynamic virtual offer presentation. Just a fancy way of saying, do it on Zoom. Just like you're watching the webinar now, for those of you who haven't done offers on Zoom, very easy to do. You can share your screen, showing all the offers to your clients while they're at home. You can also, if you want to get more advanced in your dynamic virtual offer presentation, you can put realtors who want to present their offer in the waiting room, and you can invite them into the main screen to present to your clients when you're ready for them, and then you can put them out in the waiting room, which pretty well virtually replicates how we would do multiple offers in our office and various closing rooms. So the dynamic virtual offer presentation, again, great tool. DocuSign, which we've always used. You use DocuSign at the end of your Zoom meeting and send it off to your clients for signatures. And it's a really, really great and safe and comfortable way for your sellers to deal with offers. And these are all things going through their minds when they've called you to list their property. And you can even do the listing presentation on Zoom as well. Some clients are more comfortable that way. So these are just a couple of enhancements that we've made to our marketing plan to give more comfort to our clients, give more comfort to the buyers, and enhance their home shopping experience, and allow them to still see the home in as much detail as possible without having to go through it. And of course, when they do go through it, provide a very safe environment for them to carry that out. And then the final step, doing the offers with your sellers in a Zoom platform, works extremely well, very effective. And we've surveyed our clients post-transaction and asked them, many of them are repeat clients, as I mentioned, 80% of our business is repeat, and asked them if they had a choice, would they prefer doing it the traditional way with open houses and offers in person, or do they prefer the virtual platform that we've developed? And it's pretty well heavily weighted towards the virtual platform. They said, Marty, Adam, you know, we did the offers here in our home. We had a glass of wine. We were really comfortable. You showed us everything we needed to see, and we didn't need to come to your office and find parking. We saved time. We would prefer to keep doing it this way. So that was interesting to note. Not everybody is like that. Since I prepared this presentation, we are noticing a shift back now where more and more clients are wanting to meet face-to-face. So there is definitely a trend towards that. But I think some of this is here to stay. And I think if you're able to offer alternatives for your clients, or a combination or a hybrid system, I think you'd be doing yourself well. And I think it would work out extremely well in your marketing plan. So that's my presentation. Great quote that Adam found this morning on the left there. I think as fellow realtors, you'll all appreciate. And I will unshare my screen now and let you, Calvin, take over. Thank you very much for listening, everyone.
That's fantastic, Marty. Thank you so much for all that very helpful information. One of the things that you mentioned there, that it's a real takeaway for me, and it's something that I've used in my business too, is that especially during this time, you really need to stay in contact with your clients and help them. They're going through a tough time, and so are you, but just to keep them informed as to what's going on and what's happening in the market. So we're going to now open up to some of the questions. I guess we have about 10 minutes or less to go. So we'll try to get to some questions, as many as we can, and so we can answer those. So here's one from an anonymous attendee. What would be your rationale to comment that the economic recovery will be much faster than the previous economic experience, especially this time in more global impacts? And I suppose that would go to Brendan.
Marty, you don't want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. You know, Brendan, I'll leave this one to you.
I don't think we meant that the economic recovery this time around will be faster. It's very, what we're seeing is unprecedented. So we're expecting to see this enormous decline in GDP growth in the second quarter, and then to get some of it back in the third quarter. And that looks like really strong growth, because maybe it's 15%, maybe it's 20%. Well, that means only a third to a half, maybe a quarter, or whatever, of the way back. So you kind of got to look at how long it takes to get back to where we were pre-COVID as the recovery time. And in that sense, I think it's going to be a little bit longer, even if we have really kind of historically high growth in the third quarter. That doesn't mean we've recovered.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. I think we have another one for Brendan, it looks like. What do you think, or maybe even Marty might want to answer this too, but what do you think about CMHC's prediction that we're going to see a 9 to 18% decrease? And when do you think the recession will be over, which you've already talked about, but this is certainly a controversial comment made by the head of CMHC.
Yeah, I'll take that. So I think that forecast is one of the most poorly communicated forecasts I've seen, and it's not necessarily the fault of the CMHC, although they certainly emphasized the decline. I think what I was talking about, you know, if you look at BC, so that 9 to 18% is for Canada. If you look at BC again, what CMHC is saying is the peak to trough decline might at worst be 18%. So we had a really high peak in March. So that alone means any decline is going to be pretty significant, and some of it's compositional. If you actually look at what they expect for the year as a whole, so if you look at their numbers, their forecast for home price growth in 2020 over 2019 is 0 to 4%. So up 4%. It's just where we really disagree with them. I think our forecast for 2020 over 2019 as a whole is up about 2%, right? So their high end is a little higher than we are for the year as a whole. Where the disagreement really comes in is what happens in 2021. And they have a way slower recovery and a much longer, even in sales, they have sales way down through all of 2021. And a lot of their rationale is that, once the mortgage deferral program ends and once some of the other government supports end, that the government will just withdraw them, even if the economy still needs that support. And then we're into this much more sluggish recovery. And that's where the disagreement really starts, is us and most economists expect 2021 to be stronger than 2020, whereas they're really expecting a much slower recovery in the housing market than anyone else.
Great, thank you, Brendan. Question for Marty. Are you still conducting door knocking during the pandemic? And if so, what feedback are you getting while prospecting from the homeowners?
That is an excellent question. And again, one of the things to bear in mind is that people are generally under a little bit higher anxiety levels now than they were pre-COVID. So there are certain things that you're going to need to adjust on your prospecting plan. And one of them might very well be the door knocking. One of our licensees did go out and try some door knocking the other day, and he was chased down the street by one of the homeowners. So just goes to show you, not everybody today is ready to start having people meet at their door. I mean, even the deliveries that you're seeing, we've got the FedEx guys just sort of throwing packages up in our front porch and running back to their truck. People don't want to interact typically with people at the door now. So I would focus on the calling for sure. And then when that comfort level starts to ease off and people are more comfortable at the door when you're visiting them, it's certainly a great way to prospect. But I would cater it towards calling right now.
That's great advice. Brendan, this is a really good question, I think. Have you done any forecast on the economy and real estate market if there is a second wave?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. We haven't put together a forecast, about, it would be a scenario to our baseline. Our baseline forecast sort of assumes, a fairly smooth recovery. Obviously, if we had a second wave that was fairly serious and we had to revisit some of the mitigation measures, or we kind of go back to kind of the start, we would see, if it was really bad, we'd see another kind of April, right, where right now sales are recovering. If we got a really serious second wave where people have to again go back to social distancing, you would see a dip in sales once again. We just sort of repeat what we just saw. Maybe it wouldn't be as bad because I think we've learned some lessons on how to deal with this through the past few months. So maybe it wouldn't quite be as severe, but any kind of second wave that caused us to kind of start over a little bit on reopening would just mean we go back to April essentially, and we restart that cycle again.
That's fantastic. So we just maybe got one more question to deal with here. Marty, any chance to elaborate a bit more on the virtual offer, how to protect privacy and offer details?
Yeah, very good question. In terms of privacy, what we are doing when we do send out the Zoom call invite, we're using Zoom, there's many platforms to use, is we're making sure it is labeled as a private meeting, and it is password protected, so they do need that password in order to log in. And that will avoid some of the stories you've been reading about and the Zoom meetings that have taken place. And Zoom themselves, as one platform, has done an amazing job in improving their security as a result of some of the breaches. So we are, of course, opening up the meetings just to our sellers and ourselves, the listing agents, the designated agents that are working with the sellers. Those are the ones in that private meeting. When the realtors are invited into the meeting to present their offer, if they so choose to do so, we allow them into the meeting, and then when they're put back into the waiting room, they don't overhear any of the conversation or see any of the screen sharing. So there is very good digital separation when offers are being discussed and so forth, and of course, when final decisions are being made, the waiting room is cleared out, and we're just, of course, discussing with our clients. So we're very conscious of that. Security of information in the office is very important, and you can do it on an online platform quite carefully.
Great. Okay, well, listen, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Some of these questions were excellent. We do have more, but obviously our time is up, and we need to end the virtual event. So first of all, we'd certainly like to thank our sponsor again, By Design Construction, for their support. Also want to certainly thank you all for joining us. And a very special thanks again to Brendan and Marty for your excellent information. Certainly want to also thank Cheryl, the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver, and all her crew for putting this on. When you log off this event, you will get a pop-up link to our recent or event survey, and we'd sure love to hear your feedback on today's events. And I know I saw a few questions regarding having access to the slides of both of the presenters. And I suppose what you should do is just contact the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver. I know both of them had made it available, so maybe just contact the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver and they'll get those slides out to you. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the day and stay safe.
Thanks, Calvin. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, everybody.